Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening. I'm Mike Sprague. I'm the director of the Polar Institute, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to this important and very timely program entitled Directions into Antarctic Diplomacy. We're joined today by a distinguished panel of experts, all of whom will provide critical insights on a host of issues related to environmental protection, climate change, polar science, tourism, and governance. And appropriately, they will do so in advance of the annual meeting of the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Parties to be hosted by France from June 14th to the 24th of this year. Today's event is one in a series of new programming, publications, and scholarship that the Polar Institute has undertaken to advance the many pressing issues at play in Antarctica and the Southern Ocean. With many of our Wilson colleagues, as well as colleagues from around the world, we have convened a number of events that serve as a foundation upon which our future work will be advanced. You can find an entire list of our Antarctic and Southern Oceans related programs on our website. But now it's a pleasure to welcome to the program and the person who will lead our discussion, Mr. Evan Bloom, former acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Oceans and Fisheries and Director for Ocean and Polar Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. He also serves as a senior fellow at the Polar Institute. Evan is leading the Polar Institute's Antarctic and Southern Oceans efforts, in addition to adding to our work his considerable Arctic expertise. Evan, thank you very much for crafting this program and for bringing together such an incredible panel of experts. I turn the program over to you. Thank you.
Mike, thank you very much, and thanks for coming to us from Alaska this morning. For anyone interested in Antarctic diplomacy, we have a really terrific panel today. We have with us some of the key people who will lead the discussions at the annual Antarctic Treaty Consultative meeting that will take place next month. Indeed, we have an all-star team of Antarctic diplomats. So as Mike indicated, I'm the former head of the US delegation to the ATCM. And my goal in setting up this panel was to bring together senior officials who can explain what is going on at this important moment on the annual Antarctic diplomatic calendar. So first, let me provide some background. The Antarctic Treaty of 1959 calls for regular meetings of the consultative parties, which are now held annually. Those annual meetings are hosted in turn by different consultative parties. Last year's, which was to have been hosted by Finland, was canceled because of the pandemic. This year, France is the host. They had planned to hold the meeting in Paris, but now will have to settle for a virtual session from June 14 to 24. So this is the first time in 2 years that the Antarctic Treaty Parties will have a chance to discuss governance of Antarctica. And they will discuss issues like tourism, operation of research stations, conduct of science, environmental protection, etc. Just a word about Antarctic policy and governance. The Antarctic Treaty and its meetings are one part of what is called the Antarctic Treaty System. In addition, a key part of the Antarctic Treaty System is the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Marine Living Resources, which handles marine conservation and fisheries management, but also establishment of marine protected areas, which is an Antarctic policy issue that receives a lot of attention. The CAMLAR Commission meets every year in Hobart, Tasmania at the end of October. Thus, the ATCM next month and CAMLAR in October are the two key Antarctic policy meetings each year. So we have just the right people here to tell us what to expect at the upcoming ATCM. Representing France as the host of the conference, and indeed the chairman of the conference itself, is Ambassador Olivier Poivre-Davor. He can tell us about France's ambitions for this ATCM. In addition, we have 4 of my former colleagues from Antarctic meetings who each are leaders in their country's Antarctic foreign policies. So first we'll hear from Ambassador Poivre-Davor, then in turn from Mr. Fikizolo, Mr. Golan, Ms. Newman, and Mr. Waghorn. After they have spoken, I will pose some questions for discussion, And finally, we hope to have some time for questions from the audience that can be sent to us via email. And those should be sent to polar@wilsoncenter.org. The speakers' full bios are on the website, but just to mention briefly, Ambassador Poivre d'Avour is a diplomat, maritime expert, and author. He was Ambassador of France to Tunisia, and who was appointed ambassador for the poles and maritime issues in December 2020. Lusolamzi Fikizolo is the former head of the South African delegation to the Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting and former South African commissioner to CAMLR. He's held many positions in the South African government, and currently he's director of the Specialist Monitoring Services in the Department of Forestry, Fisheries, and Environment. Maximo Goland is the National Director for Antarctic Foreign Policy in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Argentina. He is the head of the Argentine delegation to the ATCM and Argentina's CAMLR commissioner. He's a career diplomat and has served in diplomatic postings in the United States and in Uruguay. Jana Newman manages the Antarctic and Southern Ocean Unit at New Zealand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. She is the head of the New Zealand delegation to the ATCM and New Zealand's CAMLR commissioner. She formerly served with New Zealand's Antarctic program, Antarctica, New Zealand. And Rodrigo Waghorn is acting director of the Antarctic division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile. He's the head of the Chilean delegation to the ATCM and Chile's CAMLR commissioner. He's a career diplomat and has served in the Netherlands and in Italy. So as I mentioned already, if you have questions for the panelists, please send them via email to polar@wilsoncenter.org, and then those will be forwarded to me, and I will do my best to pose some that are related to our discussion. So let's begin. Ambassador Poivre d'Avour, welcome. The floor is yours.
Good morning or good evening to everybody. And thank you, Ivan. Thank you, Michael. Hello to all of my colleagues in Antarctica Mania, Jana, Rodrigo, Lizo, Lomzi, and Maximo, to your countries, the United States, South Africa, Argentina, New Zealand, and Chile. What an excellent company for French diplomats. I really appreciate the initiative of the Polar Institute of the Wilson Center to organize this, I hope, very useful event ahead of the forthcoming, as you say, annual Antarctic Treaty Consultative Meeting. And it gives us a welcome opportunity to reflect on the uniqueness of that treaty, as well as to exchange views on what is at stake in Antarctica in the 21st century. My country has always had a special relationship to the South Pole and the exploration of Antarctic regions. The call of Southern Ocean can be traced back for centuries. Among my fellow citizens, moreover, French pioneer explorers of both poles, such as Dumont d'Urville or Charcot, whose family names turned into place names in Antarctica, were followed by equally popular personalities like as Paul-Émile Victor or Jean-Louis Etienne. But what strikes me was appointed ambassador, as you say, at large for the poles and maritime issues just a few months ago, is how eager people in France today are to know more about what is going on in and around Antarctica. Not only is this an area that remains attractive for scientists and students, but also young generation, sometimes very young generation, and also civil society and members of parliament alike still keep asking questions and expressing views about the current situation of the Antarctic. We have therefore been looking forward to hosting the 43rd ATCM and the 23rd meeting of the Committee for Environmental Protection in Paris in June with both pride and joy. No need to say that the unavoidable decision to hold them as a virtual meeting, as we do today, was taken with some disappointment. We regret that the pandemics prevent us from welcoming delegation to Paris and from showing them the exhibitions and popular events planned on this occasion. Nevertheless, we are doing our best to share this experience online and through our embassies abroad. Well, let me seize the opportunity to thank all the delegation as well as the Antarctic Treaty Secretariat for their remarkable capacity to adapt to those very challenging circumstances. Just like for this present webinar, some of them will have to work very early in the morning or very late in the evening, and we will all be constrained by technical limitation. However, we are deemed to achieve a successful session this year too, because our joint interest is to demonstrate that the Antarctic Treaty and the whole system around it remain efficient and relevant. Our ambition in 2021 is to be up to what our predecessors created 60 years ago. That would be another quite important anniversary with that treaty, or to what launched at the latest Paris ATCM in 1989, and which paved the way to the Madrid Protocol while addressing the challenges of this century in Antarctica. That means preserving and maintaining their legacy in all its dimensions to safeguard Antarctica, I quote, as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. 5 items, as you know. First, an international governance overcoming competitive national claims, activities authorized for peaceful purposes only, freedom of scientific investigation and cooperation, encouragement of international scientific cooperation, and protection of natural environment. But our endeavors must also be forward-looking to ensure that these goals are still achieved in today's world. One should not look away when some raise concerns about other conducting potential dual-use research, suspicious great-scale activities, or excessive exercising of sovereignty in Antarctica. But I am of the opinion that such issues should be dealt with a transparent and inclusive manner and will be the best solved through cooperation using the existing framework designed for Antarctica. And as chairperson of the forthcoming ATCM, I will refrain from elaborating on pending issues. This will be discussed in due time by delegation, but I will refer to one information paper submitted by France and Italy to the CEP to illustrate how our present work may be relevant to the whole planet and its future. This paper deals with the so-called Ice Memory Program. That program, initially presented during the 42nd ATCM meeting in Prague in 2019, was launched by France and Italy in 2015. The overall goal of this Ice Memory Program is to first collect an ice core archive from the deep layers of key endangered glaciers before they lose their ability to preserve environmental history in optimal conditions, and second, to store these ice cores in a long-term basis, possibly hundreds to thousands of years, for future generation of scientists and humanity in general. The idea underlying this Ice Memory Program is that scientific ideas and technologies will continue to evolve in the future, making new discoveries, possibly using ice core. However, for this to happen, snow and ice core must be available to future generations and scientists when viable glaciers will have gone forever. And fortunately, the resulting ice cores being protected from the harmful effect of climate change and becoming the only remains of extremely precious environmental archive accumulated over centuries to millennia before global warming definitely affected the glaciers. This is a very concrete example of how decisions and contributions made now by the scientific and the Antarctic communities may impact the future of science, of our planet's management. Such concerns may also be recognized behind the global opinion movement in support of marine protected areas in the Antarctic Ocean, which none of us can overlook today. As you know, France, my country, but Germany, the EU, and recently the United States, thanks to Joe Biden and John Kerry, and most international countries, have joined us to ask our Russian and Chinese partners not to block the creation of the East Antarctica and of the Weddell Sea Marine Protected Area. This is for us, all of you, the President Macron himself, a major issue. I do hope we can overcome the resistance coming from Beijing and Moscow at the next Kamla meeting at the end of October. And more generally, and to conclude my remarks, Antarctic diplomacy is about much more than Antarctic issues. The signing of the Antarctic Treaty in the middle of the Cold War, the launching of the Madrid Protocol when the Berlin Wall was about to fall, demonstrated that conflicting positions could be bridged through multilateral negotiation. Will the international community be able, in the 21st century, to use similar tools to address the most urgent tasks, such as combating climate change or preserving biodiversity? Will we jointly put the global common good before national pride or economic interest? Let's near future. We will then know whether the Antarctic Treaty was just a lucky exception or pattern guiding to a more peaceful world order. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much for your opening here. I very much appreciate your comments about Antarctic diplomacy, not just being related to Antarctica, and I'm sure that the other panelists would have similar views. So what I would like to do now is turn the floor over to Lisolomzi Fikizolo of South Africa. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon or good morning to you once again. And my heartfelt greetings to you, Mr. Chairman, the fellow panelists, representatives of all parties, partners, and all colleagues participating in this broadcast, say, the world over. And my sincere thanks also goes to the Wilson Woodrow Institute of Scholars for the invitation and the support team that worked tirelessly to make this possible. And I'll also take this opportunity and congratulate the French Republic for the hosting of the 43rd ATCM meeting amidst all the difficulties that the whole world has been subjected to by the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, my well wishes go to the French Republic and to Ambassador Olivier. The subject of discussion today, that is directions in Antarctic diplomacy, I must admit that it is indeed a very interesting topic and not so easy a topic to tackle in 1 hour, especially at this day and age in the existence of the Antarctic Treaty System. And that is in consideration of what is reflected in the annals of the Antarctic history, that the ATS was and still is a diplomatic expression of the operational and scientific cooperation of all the parties, a wide-ranging and challenging undertaking indeed. But starting with the obvious, I come from South Africa, and as the name suggests, it is part of the African continent. And this discussion, I must add that it comes a couple of days after the Africa Day, which is celebrating of all our freedoms in the continent. And interestingly, as is the case with 8 members or parties, the African continent has also 54 countries. However, it is important to note that out of those 54 countries, South Africa is but the only country from the continent that is participating in both ATCM and CAMELA. And the Republic of Namibia, who are our neighbors, are taking part only in CAMELA. What this means is that the representation of Africa in the discussions and processes that are about Antarctic matters is a measly 1.86%. That also applies to the noble founding principles of the ATS, which, as stated in the preceding text, are inclusive of the diplomatic expression of the operational and scientific cooperation. Therefore, in relation to that, a question that must be asked is whether there are any plans in place or strategic processes that are being formulated in all structures of the present day ATS, and as Ambassador Olivier has mentioned, a 21st century ATS to engage with the continent of Africa. It can be acknowledged, though, that engagements at the various diplomatic levels may be relatively easy or difficult, depending on a variety of realities. However, my views are that scientific partnerships, environmental management, or ocean governance engagement with scientists, managers, or regional or national programs and other technical people may be of a lesser challenge. Again, the question is, how far down the road has ATS traveled to explore that? The reason being to ensure that the needle is moved from the low 1.86% of African representation in ATS, which is definitely incomparable to other continents. For example, Europe, which has about 49% representation. Obviously, taking that direction will bring into ATS a new set of skills, not to mention different viewpoints which can contribute immensely in resolving some of the significant impasses with regards to the administration and management of Antarctic region. For example, the marine protected areas, which I'm going to touch on at some later stage. I am raising these issues because from the South African point of view, they are critically important. And to illustrate that there is commitment from South Africa and that South Africa seeks to ensure that it remains relevant in its participation in the Antarctic question. Over the past few years, it started a process of writing its new Antarctic and Southern Ocean strategy. This new Antarctic strategy has been approved by the cabinet, and all that is left are parliamentary processes, and it may be ready for implementation before the end of 2022. In this strategy, apart from the obvious objectives that, for example, are inclusive of South Africa contributing towards the promotion and maintenance of the ecological integrity of Antarctica, they also incorporate infrastructural development that will enhance the participation of the African continent in Antarctic activities. This is not only in line with the South African government outcomes, particularly the one that talks about a better South Africa that is contributing to a better and safer Africa and the world, but it resonates with the objectives of the Africa's Integrated Maritime Strategy, the 2050 strategy. Therefore, I view these discussions that we're having today as creating a pathway upon which the ATS can trudge in reviewing some of its functions towards more inclusivity, or even the assessment of its protocols that may have inadvertently become barriers to entry. Earlier on in my speech, I made reference to MPAs, and I'm aware that it is one of the most topical issues in the ATS, particularly Camilla. I guess the interest is on what are the views of South Africa on MPAs. And I can be on the affirmative that South Africa fully supports the establishment of MPAs. Colleagues and Mr. Chairman, you would remember the Johannesburg Plan of Action of 2002, which is but one example of numerous undertakings that South Africa has illustrated its commitment to the concept of MPAs. In addition to during the protracted discussions in Camilla, which culminated in the declaration of the Ross MPA, South Africa was in support. Furthermore, within the exclusive economic zone of the mainland South Africa, we have 43 MPAs, of which 23 are old MPAs and 20 MPAs are new, that is declared, they have been declared over the past 5 years at most. And there is also one offshore MPA, which is the Prince Edward Island MPA. And that simply illustrates that South Africa supports the notion of MPAs. However, in any discussion, there will always be different viewpoints. And what South Africa has always maintained is that whilst we support the establishment of MPAs, we are equally committed to the decisions that are reached through consensus. Therefore, our support depends on how concerns of all other parties are addressed, that is adequately and appropriately. In conclusion, I would like to thank the Wilson Woodrow Institute for coming up with this discussion point. And as indicated earlier on, matters like barrier to entry, which may need further research or investigation, and strategies that needs to maybe to be put in place for a better inclusivity, maybe, and that is not only from the African continent's point of view, but South America as well, which is standing at about 6% at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I will take questions when the opportunity comes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much for those comments. So South Africa, as one of the original signatories to the Antarctic Treaty, and obviously a major gateway country for Antarctica, plays a major role in the treaty system, and those are very helpful comments. Let me turn now to Maximo Goland of Argentina, who I've worked with for many years. And Maximo, please go ahead.
Thank you, Evan. And first of all, let me thank the Wilson Center, the prestigious Wilson Center, for preparing this event and for calling us to participate. It has been certainly a very good invitation for us. I think that sharing this panel with these colleagues is also an excellent opportunity to exchange views on where the Antarctic Treaty System is moving and where the Antarctic Treaty itself is moving, especially on the verge of a very different Antarctic Treaty meeting, as Ambassador Poivre was mentioning, a virtual meeting. But unfortunately, we won't be able to be in Paris, which is certainly a pity for us as well. As you know, Argentina has had a very long history in Antarctica. It's been since the early 19th century and permanently since the very beginning of the 20th century. So we've been a very active participant in Antarctica. We've been a very active participant in the evolution of the Antarctic Treaty System, also as an original signatory to the Antarctic Treaty System. And we've been very active in the evolution of the different instruments of the Antarctic Treaty System as the different challenges for Antarctica emerged, be it by way of the conservation of seals or the mineral conventions at the time, or the conservation of Antarctic marine living resources, the protection of the environment, and all these different challenges that are always changing in Antarctica as time goes by, as technology evolves, and as more parties become involved in the Antarctic Treaty activities. We are also, as participants historically, we're very active in the current status and the agenda of the Antarctic Treaty, and we are actively involved in the evolution of the agendas for this upcoming meeting as well. We are, as you know, also host to the Antarctic Treaty Secretariat. So we assist the Secretariat as best we can to participate and to actively present its, facilitate the exchange of opinions and the information exchange that is required from parties through the Antarctic Treaty System and the Antarctic Treaty website. Obviously, I think that one of the most new issues and challenges the Antarctic Treaty is facing is precisely the pandemic. And I think this has presented a series of challenges, both for the Antarctic Treaty consultative meetings and for the other meetings of the system. The fact that we've had to establish new rules and new guidelines for the operation, the virtual operation of the system is definitely a new challenge for the system. And we are seeing that it is being quite adequately addressed. So it's, I think that we're also very familiar with the complexities of organizing an Antarctic Treaty meeting, because we've done so on several occasions, 4 occasions, in fact, and since the treaty entered into force in 1961. But we see that the challenges of this virtual meeting will be quite complex to address. We're hoping that the time limitations and constraints of a virtual meeting, which expands through 16 time zones for countries involved in Antarctic Treaty issues like Peru and Ecuador on one end and New Zealand on the other end, is definitely a challenge for the system, which, as I say, is I think is being properly addressed with the intersessional consultations that all the delegations have been involved. Regarding the specific issues we're mostly engaged in now, obviously the environmental protection aspect of Antarctic activities is certainly one of grave concern. Argentina has a very large Antarctic operation. It has 13 stations in Antarctica, and we're always trying our best to do the best environmental management we can at our stations and all our operations coming and going to Antarctica. All of our operations take place in the Antarctic sector in the peninsula area. So we see very directly what the impacts of human activity and what climate change is impacting in the peninsula area. This is why we are very involved in the aspects of the climate change involvement of the Antarctic Treaty System to address the impacts of climate change, which are very, very severe in the peninsula area. We see this firsthand with the retreat of the ice, and this has itself started to become a very concerning issue environmentally, because this impacts on krill and on the wildlife, the penguins and the seals that inhabit this area. We're very concerned with the krill fisheries, for example. This is something that is taking place in the peninsula area. And this is something of concern because krill obviously is the basis of all this food chain within the peninsula area. So this is something of grave concern for us. The environmental management aspect is, as I mentioned, is something that in itself takes is across the board of all the activities. And one of the activities that has grown tremendously and mostly in the peninsula area is tourism. We have been actively involved and are actively involved in the aspects of tourism in Antarctica, most of which I might say takes place as well in the peninsula area. Close to 90% of Antarctic maritime tourism goes through Ushuaia, which is in the southern tip of continental Argentina. And this is a huge issue because it's sort of a powerful force that is very difficult to stop or control. Tourism itself has become a very concerning issue for the Antarctic Treaty System. It's being addressed by way of establishing tourism manuals and observer mechanisms. And we're working very hard to try and obtain as much information from the tourist industry in order to try and provide the Antarctic Treaty tourism activity with a regulatory framework that is up to standards with this activity in order to reduce the environmental impact as much as possible. Again, we think that this Antarctic Treaty meeting in Paris, in which we will commemorate the 60th anniversary, no less, of the Antarctic Treaty. We believe the treaty has been extremely successful in not only controlling initially the political and potential political turmoil that was in place in the Cold War in 59 and 61, but we think it has been very effective, the treaty and all its system, the protocol on environmental protection, in addressing these very concerning issues as they've evolved. And I think to have the Antarctic Treaty meeting in the middle of this pandemic, and to show that the Antarctic Treaty is capable, even having to deal with these issues virtually, to actually engage and be able to have its meeting and address these issues, I think in itself is a very, very powerful message, in that the Antarctic Treaty is well and healthy. And this declaration will itself allow for all the parties to commit or reconfirm their commitment to the Antarctic Treaty and its different instruments. So I think this meeting will certainly be an opportunity to move forward with the main issues, which are these that I'm mentioning. Again, I think this is very timely panel that the Wilson Center has organized. I thank Evan and the Wilson Center very much for the invitation, and I look forward to the exchanges with colleagues and the questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your very focused comments. And there are a number of points that I'd like to come back to if we have time. But first, let me move next to Jana Newman, who is up. Thank you so much in the middle of the night in Wellington. So Jana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Evan. Bonjour, buenos dias, good morning, tēnā koutou katoa. And thank you, was it Maximo that talked about our end of the time zone spectrum? Thank you for that understanding. Like others have mentioned, New Zealand has a very strong connection and long-standing connection to Antarctica as well, which we are very proud of. I wanted to start with some general comments on the Antarctic Treaty System too, and some of the pressures on it. And it's really those 2 points which drive New Zealand's priorities going into the meeting, which we would also like to be there in Paris for. And thank you very much to our French hosts for their flexibility. We really place great importance on the Antarctic Treaty System, and as others have said, it's a very important year and a very important milestone where we will mark the 60th anniversary of the entering into force of the Antarctic Treaty. We now have 54 countries to the party, and all are committed to the firm foundations of that treaty. And from our perspective, that such a big part of the planet is set aside forever to be used exclusively as a place for peace, science, and international cooperation is really something to celebrate, and a triumph of diplomacy. As others have said, so we have that 60th anniversary, of course, 40 years ago. The parties recognised the importance of protecting the seas around Antarctica and established CAMLA as the machinery for the protection of marine living resources. And then 30 years ago, through the Protocol on Environmental Protection, the parties committed themselves to the comprehensive protection of the Antarctic environment and its dependent and associated ecosystems, and designated Antarctica as a natural reserve. And despite what you might read in some media, the protocol prohibits mineral resource activities indefinitely, noting that all of the parts of the treaty system can be modified at any time. None of them expire. These instruments of the treaty system are really remarkable, and our main priority going into the meeting is ensuring that the Antarctic Treaty System continues to be well placed to address the current and future challenges. The world is facing the combined crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, and set against the backdrop of the global pandemic, which is one of the most devastating in history. In addition, and perhaps with the exception of the last year, there has been rapidly increasing and diversifying human activity in Antarctica, which could risk compounding the implications of climate change and also put pressure on Antarctica's status as a natural reserve. So the parties have really prioritised work on these issues at the meeting that is coming up to really address those challenges, including focusing on research and monitoring to reduce the uncertainty in the models of future climate. Antarctica is fundamental to understanding how the world works. Also to inform the management in Antarctica, designating representative networks of protected areas, and informing proactive management of human activities in Antarctica. Addressing these challenges will require a coherent effort across the Antarctic Treaty System. So we will be meeting as Antarctic Treaty Parties, but really the efforts across the components of the treaty system are critical. And it's critical that we use all the tools of the treaty system as well. Another challenge is to ensure that the system maintains its strength through timely decisions and implementation of our obligations. This includes speeding up the entry into force of measures, which are the binding decisions that parties take, encouraging domestic legislation to implement those obligations as well. We are very supportive of the proposed Paris Declaration, which will be an important outcome to the meeting, reaffirming our shared commitments to safeguarding the Antarctic environment and timely action to address current and future environmental challenges. We have tabled a draft resolution to mark the extraordinary circumstances of the pandemic. It aims to really record the implications of the pandemic for our work and commit to continuing the really important cooperation to manage risks to people in Antarctica and to Antarctic wildlife. And we don't have time to cover all the issues, but just to mention a few very briefly, which go to address some of the challenges. We're looking forward to hearing from parties on progress to implementing the liability annex, the really important part of the protocol on environmental protection. We're looking forward to receiving the reports from recent Antarctic Treaty inspections. There is quite a bundle of work on Antarctic tourism, which we are very grateful for, and some very important issues have been mentioned by others relating to human activities in Antarctica. There's lots of very important advice coming in from the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, which we look forward to, on climate change issues and also bioprospecting. And for us, we're also really looking forward to the advice that the Committee for Environmental Protection will prepare on our comprehensive environmental evaluation for the redevelopment of Scott Base. So just in summary, our focus going into the meeting is really to make progress on the key issues of importance to the management of Antarctica and in furtherance of the principles of the treaty. And this will really set us up well for the next 60 years of Antarctic cooperation and upholding the principles of the treaty. Thank you.
Jana, thank you so much for your comments and your points about the need for coherent efforts across the treaty system are particularly well taken, and something I know that your delegation has focused on for any number of years. So now I'll turn to our last speaker. We only have about 15 minutes left. Probably should have asked that this meeting be twice as long as it is, but in any event, Rodrigo, floor is yours. Please tell us Chile's views.
Thank you very much, Evan. And I would like to say hello to all colleagues from the chairperson from France, our colleagues from Argentina, New Zealand, South Africa. And I would like to thank the Wilson Center, the Polar Institute, and the Latin American Program for inviting Chile to participate in this dialogue. As you know, I will try to be very brief. So, and I will focus my words in the Chilean delegation priorities. So, because you cover all my colleagues, they already cover all the most important issues and challenges that we face as Antarctic Treaty System. So I will focus in the Chilean delegation priorities. As you know, the Antarctic governance is key for the protection of the entire continent and its fragile ecosystem, and of course, the monitoring of the different activities conducted by different parties. That's why our delegation, among others, had supported the idea to hold a full agenda meeting, ensuring a real exchange of views during the next ATCM. That for us is very important to stress that we don't want to have the feeling that virtuality is a justification to not tackle all key issues that we think are important for the governance of the Antarctic. With the cancellation of the Helsinki meeting last year, it is necessary to ensure that the ATCM of this year can cover all the agenda items as much as possible. No? We hope that the CEP has enough time to discuss and take action on the more than 50 working papers presented to its consideration. It's a huge amount of work that they have. In this sense, we appreciate the leadership of France in conducting the head of delegation meetings to reach a consensus on holding a 9-day meeting. We think that it's very important to try to deal with that such amount of work that we have in front of us. We are as well looking forward, as Jana mentioned, to the adoption of a declaration on the anniversary of the protocol and the treaty. The pandemic emerged as a fundamental challenge in our Antarctic activities. In this sense, we are presenting 2 information papers. The first about our COVID-19 national protocol, in which we report our experience as a gateway with COVID-19 during the last Antarctic campaign. A second paper related with the last one is on the potential zoonotic transmission of the SARS-CoV-2 to Antarctic wildlife. In that regard, COPNAP is as well present in our working paper on this issue. And we think we need to pay attention to it and take measures such as monitoring the potential transmission to preserve Antarctic fauna. On the other hand, we will closely follow up the several papers and research on climate change in this ATCM. For our country, climate change and the role of Antarctica is a phenomenon is a key priority. For us, I think that for you as well, it's the same. No? That's why we present an information paper on our project called the Climate Change Observatory. This project will include a network of multi-parametric sensors in Antarctica, covering all the latitudinal gradient from the very north of Chile to the Union Glacier Chilean station near the pole. I was thinking about what was said by the ambassador of France and how we can maybe link this Chilean initiative with the Ice Memory project that maybe could be a good idea to make some connections in that regard. Another issue that we attach great importance in this ATCM will be all the discussions on Antarctic tourism, as was mentioned by Maximo. In this line, we fully engage in all the pre-meeting discussions in the ATCM online forums on the different proposals, such as the Manual of Tourism, the Onboard Observers Framework, and other working papers that for us are very important. From our side, we presented a working paper with Argentina to draw attention to the Antarctic community of the potential risk of the increased activities during the solar eclipse next December, the 4th of December. Finally, we presented a working paper to highlight the importance of improving emergency plans for natural disasters in Antarctica. In the last year, we saw an increase in the seismic activity in the north of the Antarctic Peninsula, which includes more than 30,000 tremors and a magnitude 7.1 earthquake that triggered Chile's tsunami warning system last summer. Our working paper has 2 objectives in that regard: encourage parties to improve the scientific research of seismic activity in the Antarctic Peninsula and promote the exchange of information on risk management plans for disasters in Antarctica. Finally, we will present several information papers on our national Antarctic program and activities, such as our national scientific program and our educational and outreach activities. This year also, we will be very pleased to inform the parties of the gender agenda of our national scientific program, the ratification by our Parliament of Annex 6 of the protocol, our new Antarctic law that will give us a renewed framework to implement the Madrid Protocol. So as you see, Chile will have a very intense participation this year. We are fully committed with this ATCM because we believe we should send a clear signal to the world regarding the importance of Antarctica and the key role of the Antarctic Treaty System to protect this unique place, fundamental for the future of the humankind. Thank you very much.
Rodrigo, thank you very much. And I appreciate that you spent a bit of time talking about the Climate Change Observatory, which I know has very high level support in your government. I think it's a very important proposal. So we only have 8 or 9 minutes left. And so I'd like to move very quickly to some questions. First of all, a number of you have mentioned a declaration. I believe the French delegation is working behind the scenes on negotiating aspects of that now. And so I wanted to ask for some thoughts on what are the priorities that France in particular would like to achieve with the declaration, and any others who have a view on what are some key points that would need to be reflected in that document. So Ambassador Poivre-Devoire, would you like to respond?
Sorry, I missed your question because I have some internet difficulties. Can you repeat it?
Sure. I'm asking about the declaration, the Paris Declaration, which we understand a number of your colleagues mentioned that one is going to be proposed for adoption. And so does the French delegation have particular elements for a declaration that you give priority to?
You probably mean the declaration to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the Madrid Protocol?
Yes. Well, the 60, yeah.
Probably, yeah. I can't tell you much about that, but you know what I can say that the last ATCM in Paris that I told you was in 89, last century, and Michel Rocard, who was the prime minister at this time, was the chairperson, in fact, and he was really shocked by the idea of the Wellington Convention about, you know, the extraction of mines in Antarctica. And this last edition of the ATCM in Paris was, if I read the archives, was very difficult to run and to manage. This one will be, in effect, probably quieter. And I know there will be a medals and a decoration given to a huge, the most important science research made on Antarctica in the last 5 years. And I can't tell you exactly who is going to have this decoration, but we will, it's in our agenda, yes, perfectly.
So thank you very much. Does anyone else wish to comment on any elements you'd like to see in this declaration? Maximo?
Yes, hi, thank you for this. I think the declaration itself is one of the main aspects of the declaration is to state very clearly that the Antarctic Treaty System is alive and well in capacity to address the different issues and concerns that we have as an Antarctic community. I think that it is taking up on the issues of tourism, of climate change, of marine protection. It is taking up on the issues of the need for the different Antarctic bodies to interact more efficiently and more appropriately amongst themselves. So, I mean, if I were to say that one of the main messages the declaration requires, because there's been a lot of talk that the Antarctic Treaty might end and that it's not doing so well, I think the message needs to be loud and clear that the Antarctic Treaty is in a very good place and able and capable of addressing all these concerning issues.
Thank you very much. Other colleagues about the declaration? If not, Jana, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I did mention the declaration in my introduction, and I was really going to say what Maximo has said as well. I think it really underscores the importance of the treaty parties looking ahead at the future challenges and drawing on all the important tools of the treaty system. So we see it as a really important moment as well. And thank you very much to France for their work on it.
Thank you, Jana. So let me move to another area. I was really glad that Lisa Lumsey focused on the question of inclusivity in the treaty system. And those who follow these matters know that we have claimant states who are particularly active in Antarctic diplomacy, and some others in various aspects. But this question of how all parties can fully participate, not only in the diplomacy, but in the science, is, I think, a very important one. And I wonder if others have observations flowing from what our colleague was mentioning before, either in relation to the work done through the ATCM or CAMLR. Maximo?
Well, I think essentially the one of the main aspects of the treaty is cooperation, and to be able to cooperate between the different countries is essential, and that in effect what it allows for is for the more experienced countries, or those countries with the most history and activity within Antarctica, to actually be able to assist those new countries or the newcomers that are being involved and becoming involved with the system in their participation, in order to be able to adequately comply with the norms of the system. So I would definitely focus that on cooperation, the need for further and more enhanced cooperation between the different countries, old and new.
Thank you. Rodrigo, yes, please.
Just following what Maximo already said, that cooperation is key. We, for instance, our national scientific program is a very inclusive program. We have invited during for the last 20, 30 years, several countries that they are not signatory parties of the Antarctic Treaty to participate in our scientific research. And we have established cooperation with institutions, with universities, with always in the framework of the system. But I think that the scientific programs of the countries that are already there, they are very open to establish links and to invite all different countries to participate in the different research. Now that we are facing the climate change challenge, I think it's mandatory for us to be even much more open to accept and to invite the international community to participate in our activities in Antarctica. So that's the thing that I wanted to stress. Thank you.
Thank you. We only have a little over a minute, so Ambassador Poivre-Davor, sir.
Yes, sorry, because due to some reasons, I have a very bad connection, so I made a mistake a few minutes ago between decoration and declaration. So I'm sorry, but one issue will be important, definitely, tourism. And because it's my first time, I should say, in this ATCM, but even if it's only, we are speaking about 70,000 people visiting or looking at Antarctica each year, that's a topic which will be really shared by all of us. And also clearly for us, as you heard, the marine protected area issue, which is the issue of the CAMLR, clearly, but it should be raised also during the ATCM, because it's only a matter of convincing two countries, Russia and China. So I do know that we will support all of this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we have about a half a minute. And so, Lisa Lumsey, I just wanted to ask you if you had any reaction to the point on inclusivity, and we can end with you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Shannon. And from my side, what I can say is Antarctica, we view it as South Africa as the pulse of how the globe functions. And we are very much committed in kind of making it work, or cooperating with all the countries that are there. But what I wanted to raise is inclusivity in our view is making or taking the steps forward whereby all those that maybe are not even supporting, but that they can be brought closer to where the discussions are. Climate change is affecting all of us. Resources that are in there that needs protection and the environment that needs to be protected involve all of us. The same applies to the tourism, which is an economic aspect that has been mentioned by colleagues, is I would say for all of us as well. And then we need that kind of engagements which are going to be institutionalized. And it can be uncomfortable, but it is a matter that we are of the view that it needs to be explored.
Well, thank you so much. And as we've reached the end of our time, I just want to thank everyone. This is a really extraordinary group of people, very knowledgeable. And so Antarctic diplomacy and governance is in very good hands. And so I want to thank all of you on behalf of the Wilson Center in Washington, and wish all of you a good morning, evening, etc. Thank you so much for tuning in. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.